Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and I just got back from SCGCon Orlando, where I competed in multiple events, getting second place in one of them and sixth place in another. And I will be doing a recap video really soon detailing all of that, but that's not what we're here for today. Today we're back with another spoiler video for Magic the Gathering Spider-Man expansion. This is going to detail everything that dropped on day one of spoiler season. We're going to get caught up with all of the spoilers for Spider-Man. I've got a bunch of videos coming, so if you're interested in checking them all out with me, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new. And if you're not new, please hit that like button. It helps a ton. It helps me get this video out to more people. It helps the channel grow, and I would appreciate it more than I can possibly express with words. So thank you to you guys that do it and like the video every time. It means a lot. We're going to dive right in. Like, subscribe, do the thing. Let's get it done. First of all, we have Steel Wrecking Ball. This is a 5 mana artifact. This is the only common of the day. When this artifact enters, it deals 5 damage to target creature, but you can also pay 1 red and 1 and discard this card to destroy target artifact. So it has multiple uses. 5 mana is a lot, but it is just a common, so it's basically meant to just be removal in limited in particular, and it's removal in limited that you can run in any deck since it's colorless. But obviously if you run it in red, you get extra value here where not only can you destroy an artifact, but you're possibly enabling some of the discard mechanics that we've seen in this set, and it seems like this set does have a lot of interesting discard mechanics. So the fact that you discard this card to destroy an artifact could play into that a little bit. It also means that that ability can't be countered because you're not actually casting it, you're discarding the card. So pretty interesting for limited, I think. Next up, we've got our first uncommon of the day. This is Pictures of Spider-Man, an artifact for 1 green and 2. When this artifact enters, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 creature cards from among them, put them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You can also pay 1 mana, tap, and sacrifice this artifact to create a treasure token. I actually think this card is really good, particularly in limited. In limited, you're looking for ways to fix your colors to enable you to be able to maybe splash 1 or 2 colors that are off color in like a third splash color. And this really helps you do that while also getting you card advantage and card selection, which honestly, having all of those things in the same package is really, really good. Usually in limited, you're looking to run something that's going to fix you. Usually it's fetching a basic, but even if you use the treasure the same turn that you make it, you're basically filtering, right? You're paying 1 colorless, turning it into a thing that you sack to then get 1 of any color. So it's not actually costing you any more mana to play the thing that's off color that you don't have the color for yet. But then there's even more value because you can just keep that treasure token for next turn and maybe play something that you're a land off of playing. It ramps you to get something more expensive out quicker as well. And having all of that tacked onto a card that's already getting you card advantage and card selection by letting you look at the top 5 and pick 2. Honestly, everything about this card is probably something you'll want to run in limited. Being able to essentially draw 2 for 3 mana in green, but have card selection for those 2, and filtering, and ramp. It's everything you want in limited, and I'll definitely be using this card. Next up, we've got Flash Thompson Spider-Fan, a 2/2 legendary human citizen with Flash for 1 white and 1. Makes sense thematically. When Flash Thompson enters, choose 1 or both. You can either heckle, tap target creature, or hero worship, untap target creature. I love this card. This honestly might be good enough for constructed play, to be completely honest. Getting a 2/2 at instant speed for 2 mana is already pretty good for something that has a rarity lower than rare to begin with, at least for limited. But then having the ability to choose both of these, tap something and untap something, seems kind of nuts. Before your opponent goes to combat, you can slam this in, untap your best blocker, tap their best attacker, and essentially cancel out their entire attack if you want. But if you want to be a little trickier, you can wait until they attack, slam this in, tap the thing that they held back and didn't attack with that they wanted to block with next turn, so now they have no blockers, and also untap your best blocker to block their best attacker and kill it, and also potentially have Flash Thompson as a 2/2 there to trade with one of their 2 toughness creatures as well. So if you play this just right, you can blow out your opponent in really, really crazy ways. And I actually have a flash deck that I use pretty commonly in standard that I'm going to want to test this guy out in, because I think this might be a welcome addition and a way to really mess with your opponent's math. Pretty cool card. But next up, we've got Ezekiel Sims, Spider-Totem, a 3/5 legendary spider human advisor with reach for 1 green and 4. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target spider you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Now, normally, I wouldn't know how good this is, but because it's in a set where, like, half the creatures seem like they're spiders right out of the gate, being able to essentially give almost any creature on your side a +2/+2 buff every single turn, while also having this big body with reach that can just sit back and block all day long, honestly seems really good for limited in particular. Spider and human, so 2 different tribal types that are relevant. Advisor, not so sure. But this seems like it's going to be pretty decent in limited. It really depends on how many spiders there are, but for all intents and purposes, it seems like there's going to be a ton. It seems like maybe almost half the cards in the set will end up being spiders. We don't know that for sure, but obviously the more there are, the better this card gets. And of course, in limited, you're going to be building into that archetype if you're trying to take advantage of Ezekiel. So, you know, for the most part, you can make sure most of your deck is spiders. I think there's enough to do that. And then maybe just splash a few non-spiders because they're just so good. And you're always going to have some kind of a target for Ezekiel. So yeah, I think this guy's pretty cool in limited. Next up, we've got Spider's Man, Heroic Horde. I'm not exactly sure which comic story this is from, but clearly there was one that went a little off the rails. Spider's Man, Heroic Horde, a 2/3 legendary spider hero for 1 green and 1, but it also has web slinging for 2 green and 4, which means you can spend 6 mana to play this if you also return a tapped creature to your hand when you play it. I think this is one of the first ones we've seen where this web slinging ability, the web slinging alternate cost, is more expensive than the base cost. Normally, web slinging is a way to get something out cheaper, with the downside of having to return something to your hand, and then you try to take advantage of that by returning something that can get you extra value when you replay it with enters the battlefield abilities or whatever. This card is very different though. This card is a much more expensive web slinging ability, and the reason for that is when Spider's Man enters, if they were cast using web slinging, you gain 3 life and create 2/2/1 green spider creature tokens with reach. So for 2 mana, you can get just a 2/3. For 6 mana and returning a tapped creature, you get a 2/3, 2/2/1s with reach, and 3 life. And there's a lot of value there and versatility. Being able to play this early to make sure you have a dude on the board that can block well and just have some board presence is really good, especially when later on, when you top deck it, it's not limited to just being a 2/3, right? It's kind of like a insta board in one card in a way, which is really nice. But where a card like this gets super interesting is if you're building into a web slinging archetype in limited. You play this guy early, and then eventually later on, you tap him to attack, and you web sling him back to your hand to pay for something else's web slinging cost to get value. Get that thing out cheaper, because normally those costs are cheaper than the hard cost. And then it's back in your hand, and when you replay it, you can replay it for the web slinging ability. So I think there's a lot of really interesting ways to just synergize and cross synergize some of these web slinging abilities. And this is a really good example of that, something you can play early to enable other web slinging, and then also when it's web slung back to your hand, be able to use its web slinging ability to get even more value off of it. So I'm excited to try a card like this in limited. I think it's going to be super fun. But next up, we've got our first rare today. This is Rent is Due, an enchantment for 1 white mana. At the beginning of your end step, you may tap 2 untapped creatures and or treasures you control. If you do, draw a card. Otherwise, sacrifice this enchantment. So first, right out of the gate, my first thought is some sort of Convoke deck where you're going wide with a ton of creatures. We've seen those in Standard and over the last year or two, where you have a bunch of presence out on the board that you're tapping every turn anyway to get value, build up value to make your board even better to eventually do an alpha strike. 𝐿𝑦 could fit into that sort of archetype where you're tapping 2 of your creatures each turn, so you get to draw an extra card, which is kind of like a 1-mana Phyrexian Arena without paying a life, as long as you have a couple token creatures to tap. But I think where this card gets even more interesting is the treasures aspect. If you can be in a treasures deck where you can get out a couple treasures really quick that you want to save for later, well, now you don't have to tap any of your creatures. You can be super aggressive, you can hold up blockers, you can do everything you want to do with your creatures, just be tapping down those treasures every single turn to draw cards. And when you draw into the bigger things that you want to ramp into with those treasures eventually down the line, you use the treasures, play the big thing cheaper sooner than you probably could, and then you can still start to draw cards with some of your little guys, because at that point in the game, a couple of those little guys are going to probably not be quite good enough to still participate in combat unless they're chump blockers. So at that point, you're just really only giving up a couple chump blockers by tapping down a couple of your small token dudes from the early game to draw cards, while your bigger threats, especially the one that you use the treasures to pay for, are putting in a lot more work and putting a lot more pressure on the opponent. The fact that this comes out for just 1 mana, and you can play it super early, or you can play it like, say you could play a 1-drop on 1, a 1-drop, and Rent is Due on turn 2, and already have the ability to start drawing cards, I think that's pretty crazy. So I do think that this card will end up seeing play. I think you have to build around it very carefully and very specifically, and the most interesting part is definitely the treasures part, because there isn't really like a treasure deck in Standard right now, but if there's enough treasure support coming in this set, combined with the little bit of treasure support that is left over in Standard right now, it could maybe make a treasure deck relevant again in Standard, and it could be pretty interesting. So kind of just excited to see where this card goes and what kind of archetypes end up using it best. And if you have ideas, definitely let me know in the comments. But next up, we've got Radioactive Spider, a 1/1 spider with reach and death touch for 1 green mana. This is one of the better 1-drops we've seen in quite a while. He also has the Fateful Bite ability, so you can pay 2 mana, sacrifice this creature, search your library for a spider hero card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle, but activate only as a sorcery. I love everything about this card, and it makes sense that it's a rare. You just jam it on 1, your opponent never gets to attack with anything they want to, it just sits there forever. Your opponent either has to waste removal on it, which is normally going to cost more mana than what you use to pay for the Radioactive Spider in the first place, or they just get stonewalled and can never swing in, because this thing can literally block anything with reach and kill anything with death touch. But at the same time, you don't actually want to do that. What you want to do is try and make your opponent scared to attack in so that you never need to block with this thing. And it just basically fogs your opponent every turn. As long as you're able to psychologically manipulate them the right ways, it kind of fogs your opponent every single turn. And then eventually, when the value of that ability goes away, you then sacrifice it to the Fateful Bite ability and find a much more relevant card, something super bomby in your deck that you can play later on in the game. And so it kind of performs 2 different functions at the same time, which I sort of love about it. It can also just be the 1/1 reach death touch right out of the gate with no plan to ever sacrifice it for the Fateful Bite ability. But then if you draw like another one later on in the game when you have a ton of mana, you could just spend 3 right away, 1 to play it, 2 to sack it, and just search up whatever you want. And I don't necessarily think you're going to want to do that too often. If you happen to get this in limited, you absolutely will. But I do think that there are going to be plenty of spider heroes to fetch with this thing, and there might be a lot of interesting possibilities when it comes to deck building, specifically in Standard. We're going to have to wait until we see the entire set to know for sure, but this card has a ton of potential, so I'm pretty excited about it. Next up, we've got Peter Parker's Camera. This is an artifact for 1 colorless mana. It enters with 3 film counters on it, and you can pay 2 mana, tap, and remove a film counter from this artifact, copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. This is actually really powerful. If you have ways of increasing counters on this, like the 1 card that we just got out of Edge of Eternities, which can warp in for a green and adds extra counters, and then you can hard cast it for 4, and it's an enchantment that adds extra counters. You could use that to make sure this enters with more counters, which is really cool. You could proliferate more counters onto this, but what's really awesome about it is just whenever you want, you can just pay 2 mana, tap, and copy whatever you want. All you have to really worry about is running out of film counters, which I don't think is going to happen very often. If you've managed to copy 3 spells over the course of the game, you're probably winning. You're probably generating enough value, at least if you've built your deck properly, where this is going to get you enough value off those copies, which you absolutely should be. I think it could be kind of nuts. The only thing I worry about is 2 mana might be a lot, depending on what you're trying to copy. But even then, like, even if you're just copying removal, right, you could play this on 1, and say, like, turn 3, you could shock a creature and copy it and shock another creature. Or, like, turn 4, you could play a 2 mana hard removal on something, and then basically get another one without having it in your hand for the same amount of mana, just by tapping this thing as well. So, I think it could be really interesting used that way. Anything that's, you know, a 2 or 3 mana spell that gets you a lot of value, either hard removal or card draw or anything like that, being able to spend a total of 4 or 5 mana to get 2 of them and only using up 1 card could be really, really strong. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I want to try to build like a control archetype around this, where we're using a lot of removal and we're doubling up on the removal, maybe even burn. I think there's a lot of different ways you could use this card. Honestly, kind of excited about it, so I'm definitely going to brew with it when early access rears its ugly head, which early access won't actually be using Spider-Man, the Spider-Man set, because they have an equal exact copy of the Spider-Man set coming to Arena, except it isn't Spider-Man. All of the arts will be in lore, in story, Arena, like Magic the Gathering stuff, and all the names will be as well. But functionally, that set on Arena will be identical to Spider-Man, so you'll be able to build all of the exact same decks and use them all the exact same ways. So anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but my point is I'm definitely going to brew with this card, whatever the version, Arena's version of this card ends up being, and I'm pretty excited about that. Next up, we've got Agent Venom, a 2/3 legendary symbiote soldier hero with both Flash and Menace for 3 mana, 1 black and 2. Honestly, pretty good. A 2/3 Flash that also has Menace for 3, already pretty decent out of the gate. But also, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you draw a card and lose a life. So you flash it in when you know something's gonna die. So not only do you get the 2/3 body with Menace down at instant speed, but you're already pretty much drawing a card automatically on play. So in a way, you can kind of view this as a 2/3 Flash Menace that draws you a card and makes you lose a life when you play it for 3 mana, which is insanely good, and then also draws you another card, losing a life each time, anytime another non-token creature dies. And another thing I want to point out about this card is it's not limited to once per turn. A lot of these cards we've seen draw cards in this way in past years have been kind of nerfed into the ground. They're always limited to once per turn, and I always get sad when I see that. But this guy is not. You can draw as many cards as you want, and it doesn't say if 1 or more creatures you control die, draw a card and lose a life. So even if your entire board gets wiped, you can draw a ton of cards. Granted, you're going to lose a lot of life as well, but you'll draw a ton of cards. So the potential for this card is kind of nuts. And honestly, the more I think about it, the crazier I think it is. I think this is probably going to be, at least for now, this is one of the better cards we've seen from the set, I think. It's just pure value for a very cheap cost, and there's a lot of ways you can be super tricky with it. So I'm excited to see where this lands as far as standard. Obviously, it's a slam it must play in limited. The card's just bananas in limited, but it's a rare, so it should be. Next up, we've got Interdimensional Web Watch. This is an artifact for 4 colorless mana. When it enters, you exile the top 2 cards of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. Okay, that's pretty good. Until the end of your turn is sometimes rough, but until the end of your next turn, you get to untap everything before you have to use it or lose it. But also, this thing taps to add 2 mana in any combination of colors, but spend this mana only to cast spells from exile. So they're going hard into playing from exile with this set, it seems. Having a rare that does this, it's pretty obvious, and I think we're going to see a lot more cards coming out of this set that are going to support that kind of archetype. And there's already a decent number of cards in Standard right now that do, That being said, we did lose 𝑇𝑒𝑚𝑒, which was really an amazing, one of the better payoffs for playing from exile. But we do have a bunch of stuff in standard right now that is still paying off in that way. So it'll be interesting to see if we can try to build like a plays from exile deck. This is, to me, is a signpost. This is an obvious sign that they want a deck like that to exist in standard, and there's probably a lot more support coming for it in this set. So I'm excited to see what else comes and just how relevant this ends up being, just how consistent and reliable being able to play from exile and build a deck around doing that ends up being. This card could be really, really good if that deck is efficiently costed enough and powerful enough. Could end up being pretty nuts. But next up, we've got Impostor Syndrome, which is our first mythic of the day. This is 2 blue and 4 for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you create a token that's a copy of it, except it isn't legendary. This card's actually nuts. On first glance, it seems like, oh, a 6 mana enchantment that is a do-nothing. That's way too expensive, and, you know, but it's not a do-nothing. It kind of feels like it is. We've seen enchantments like this in the past that are expensive, and you have to get value in some other way, some outside source from the enchantment, and so it feels like you have to wait a turn. But with this, you actually don't. You just jam it right before combat, swing with everything, and as long as anything gets through, you get value. And even if they kill the enchantment later, you've still been able to make a token of anything that gets through. And what's cool too is most of the time, the creatures that your opponent's letting get through for combat damage are things that are really bad for them to block, and that's why they're letting them through. So if those are the things you get to get copies of, that ends up being even more powerful, right? They have to sort of second guess what they're blocking now. Maybe they want to double up blocks on your most powerful thing and kill it to not let it get through and make a copy of itself. And the fact that the copy isn't legendary means it doesn't even matter if there are, you know, legendary creatures swinging in. Normally, if that wasn't the case, your opponent would just let the legendary creatures hit because the copies would die to the legend rule. But the tokens, they're not legendary, so that makes this card even crazier. I actually think this card's going to be absolutely nuts. If you could play this in some kind of an aggressive deck where you're just going wide with a ton of creatures, and this is your top end, and then you just slam it, swing with everything, and your opponent loses their mind because they have to block things they normally wouldn't want to block because it's like a bad trade for them, or because, you know, they're going to have to chump, or whatever the case may be. Well, now they have to even more carefully think about those blocks because you're going to get copies of all of the things that they don't want to block. And having one thing that they don't want to block is nowhere near as bad as having 2 of that same thing that they still don't want to block. So I think this card could be kind of crazy. It also combos with that Radioactive Spider we saw earlier in a way, because it swings in with Death Touch. They don't want to block it because of the Death Touch, but if they don't, you get a copy of it, and then the original that's tapped, you can sack to find a Spider hero and still have one on the field untapped, able to block. That's the other part of this card that's really important to note, is that all of those tokens are untapped when they come into play. So this card also lets you just attack carefree without worrying about the crackback, because every single creature that gets through is going to generate a blocker for you. So you don't have to worry about like holding back blockers. Like, as long as you're going to at least get through with a couple of your creatures on your Alpha Strike, it really helps to cement the lead, because it's really hard for your opponent to crack back if you just made a bunch of blockers. Everything about this card is nuts. This card's going to be crazy. I think it's going to be a real contender in Standard. At least I'm hoping, because I think it's honestly really interesting. But that brings us to our last card today. That's Web of Life and Destiny. An enchantment for 2 green and 6. It has Convoke, so you can tap your creatures in order to help cast the spell. The tapped creature pays for 1 colorless or 1 mana of that creature's color. So if you tap 2 green creatures and 6 anything creatures, you can actually play this thing for free. We don't know what it does yet, but that seems scary for an 8-drop. At the beginning of combat on your turn, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So at the beginning of combat, every single turn, you get the best creature from the top 5 for free immediately onto the battlefield. That's really, really good. I think most of the time you're not going to play this for free, but you are going to play this for very cheap, right? If you can jam out like 4 creatures by turn 3, this thing's only going to cost you 4 mana to play. And if you spend 4 mana, look at the top 5, and find something that's at least 4 mana, you're not really at a tempo disadvantage. You're not paying extra to get this thing online because of the value that it can generate every single turn. Instead, you're paying about the same amount, maybe even a little bit less, to find something that's equal or more value, and then having the silver lining value of being able to trigger this every single turn after. The fact that you can get the value immediately on the turn you play it is what makes it great. So, like I said, I think, you know, most people will look at this card and think, how do I get it out for free? But I think just getting it out for 3 or 4 mana is going to be super powerful. And if you could just go super wide, super quick, playing something like this, and the card that we just saw that can make copies of everything that hits, both of these cards incentivize going as wide as possible with a bunch of creatures. So you have as many ways as possible to either make copies with the other card, or just convoke this thing with this card. There seems to be a lot in this set so far, at least in today's cards, that incentivize going as wide as possible. And there's absolutely going to be some kind of a crazy go wide convoke deck in Standard. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but knowing how powerful those decks have been in the past and how much support they seem to be getting in this set, something like that is going to exist for sure. It's probably going to be banned. I have a feeling it will be banned. But yeah, I think this card has an insane amount of potential. It's pretty wild. You see that 8 mana cost. At first it looks daunting and it looks like this is just too expensive and not worth it, but I really do think in the right deck this is going to come down for super cheap, replace itself immediately as soon as you trigger combat with something that's even more mana than you spent on it, and then you're just off to the races. So yeah, this card is crazy. I can't wait to see what else comes in this set that helps convoke decks work even better. But that's going to do it for this video. I do still have Day 0 and Day 2 spoiler videos on the way. And like I said before, I have a recap video from SCGCon Orlando with some of the tournaments that I participated in, and just a general recap of the entire weekend. I'm excited about that video. It was an amazing experience going to SCGCon out there in Florida, and I can't wait to talk with you guys about it. But that's another video for another time. So I'll see you on the next spoiler video. I'll see you on the recap video when I put that out. Thanks for checking it out. Like, subscribe, do the things. I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.